All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rocco Tranquil, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. On behalf of Carasoft Technology Corporation, I would like to welcome you to our RegScale and Sicura webinar, From Zero to ATO, Automating the Full Compliance Lifecycle. And now I will pass it off to our speakers. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much, Rocco. Appreciate it. My name is Lisa Umberger. I am the CEO of Sicura. I spent about 12 years supporting the IC, going through ATO myself and helping others get through ATO. And then Travis, if you want to go next.
Yeah, I'm Travis Howerton, co-founder and CEO of RegScale. Spent 20 years in national security, retiring as the first chief technology officer of the U.S. nuclear weapons program. Then went to Oak Ridge National Lab and ran their IT services division. And last tour of duty was with Bechtel Corporation, where I got to lead digital transformation globally. So we're excited to be here today.
Hey everybody, Dave Rayleigh, Digital Program Manager with Marine Corps, and drafting a little bit off of what Travis said. Privileged to be able to to be doing digital transformation within my organization, about 15 years as a civilian within the Marine Corps, and also now founding and enabling a capability called Operation StormBreaker as part of that role. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. Kendall Moore, and co-founder and CTO at Sicura. Background for me, I spent 6 years at NSA as a DevOps engineer, and then another 10 or 11 years post-NSA doing compliance automation for both defense contractors and Fortune 1000 institutions. Looking forward to it. Nice to meet everyone, and happy to get into it here.
Awesome. Great. So let's start, guys, by framing the problem a little bit. So Dave, we'll start with you. What problem are we trying to solve?
Yeah, what led us down the path of starting to address this is two primary areas. One was legacy compliance approaches, and then this waterfall, I call it waterfall acquisition and acquisition and development approaches. Those two things were costing our organization. Our ability to field capability was 4 or 5 years or longer because of those two things. And in my role leading our customer experience digital team, this ended up being such a problem we couldn't even field capabilities. The organization was all bogged down with dealing with ERP deployments and larger system deployments. And so those other mission owners like myself had no capacity to get in there and start actually doing the innovation in the new capability that we needed to support our customers. So that was the primary driver behind us addressing and attacking this problem.
Great. And since everybody's had a little bit of different experience, Kendall, how would you frame the problem and what we're trying to solve, and why it's important to solve this problem?
Yeah, so framing the problem, I would say ATO is inefficient, right? If we're just going to sum it up as concisely as possible, I think we can get in a little later on kind of some of the different timelines we've seen, but suffice it to say, it was taking us a year or more to get mission capabilities in front of operators, warfighters, et cetera. And I was an engineer on a team who was tasked with automating away as much of the technical compliant requirements as possible. And the reason we did that was, again, just to remove manual effort. I think the phrase I always like to use with people is let engineers solve real problems, not bureaucratic ones. So to me, that is really the crux of it, is it's a large bureaucratic problem.
And Lisa, if I could just add a little bit more to what Kendall was saying. So I told you what we were experiencing, but why is this a problem for our organization and for, my view, DoD in general? The issue is we're in a current time of global uncertainty, and digital dominance is starting to be a very, very critical piece of what we need to do to either deter conflict or win if we have to engage. And warfighters are now deploying at this point to the pace of change that where software is integral to warfighting and being able to project power is increasing exponentially. So starting to see that solving the problem of acquiring and fielding capability becomes a imperative for the DoD, and it's increasingly so the more we go on.
Yeah, Travis, have you seen the same things?
Yep, very similar. What I'd say is the fundamental problem we're trying to solve is sort of twofold. The government is behind the private sector by at least a decade, sometimes much farther. And one of the significant reasons is the ATO process takes so long. And just to give you sort of a factor of inefficiency, in the DoD, if we're going to ATO a new system, it would be cheaper to buy everybody on this call a Bentley than it would to be put them through the ATO process. That's how inefficient it is. So when you think about sort of the Department of Government Efficiency and what the government's trying to do to get its financial house in order, we've got to come up with automated solutions to this problem because the mission needs to go faster. The government can't pay these kind of costs anymore. And then the only solution to it is automation and getting out of manual processes. And so that's how I'd frame sort of the top line problem.
Yeah, I think on average, getting through ATO typically takes about 12 to 18 months and costs about $1 million. And that's, per system, per released, per deployment. So, yeah.
Yeah, Lisa, related to that, we experienced that. This was been about 1.5 years ago. I was experiencing some issues and some delays and getting some authorizations done with some internal processes and things like that as we were working through how do we actually move to what we call the Agile ATO process. And I did a very deliberate financial evaluation. I put the light of economics on that cost of delay and quickly realized that very conservatively, every system that was delayed for a month per month of delay was at least $100,000 in cost to the government. You were talking about running 2 production systems simultaneously, patching and maintaining those. You have project teams choked back and held kind of in this kind of pause mode while they're sitting waiting for the cyber and those cycles of reviews on control implementation, about in the validation and self-assessment of those controls all happening. And then not only that, with those 2 pieces, you also have all the cost of the actual cyber teams and the other people that you're applying to that. So it's north of $100,000 per system. And in recent discussions with the DoD CIO's office, I came to understand there's about 5,500 authorization packages across the DoD. So you start to look at that math real quick, and that's over $5.5 billion spent in the DoD just in the conservative estimate of $1 million per system to get it authorized.
Yeah.
And that's assuming it only took 12 months and you were only spending $100,000 a month. And I think there's places, and I've seen cases where it's much higher, and I'm sure you guys have as well.
Yeah, I was going to say those numbers feel low, to be honest, but yeah, it's a lot. So, Dave, when you first started trying to solve this problem within your organization, what were some of the biggest obstacles that you ran into, and what were some of the ways that you were able to solve them?
Well, probably the biggest obstacle, and nobody should laugh at this one, but it's true. Statements starting with, well, we've always done it that way. That was the issue. So I came in with a little bit of a fresh mindset, not having a technical background, and that allowed me to look at things from like a value stream analysis perspective. And so we started to see things outside, like what you described there. I'm not sure that most people that are working through an ATO process are sitting there and saying, what is this costing our organization, integrated mission capability and actual hard costs when it comes from the cost of delay. It's just like, well, this sucks. We have to go through this paperwork process and we're not going to get this thing fielded. But I was looking at through it from that lens with my team. And then we started applying those lean and DevOps methodologies to a non-DevOps problem, or a traditionally you're talking DevOps and you're doing engineer work and things like that. We applied those same principles, visualizing work in progress, reducing batch sizes to a batch size of 1 if we could, understanding where the bottlenecks were, swarming on those bottlenecks, and all the things that you might do using Kanban boards to manage work. all those types of things that helps us actually see and then address where is the real problem happening, and then how do we get after that. So secondly, that led us to being able to see, in some cases, there were local compliance practices that were not required. And then, working through that with the local teams sometimes was valuable and worked, and other times we had to bring in higher headquarters guidance and advocate up and say, hey, we believe this local process is not required, and figure it out. So there's a lot of things, and I'm even still working through those exact same issues even this morning. As we continue to extend and grow, you constantly see where a local practice is applied, is related to something that's no longer valid or was put in place before a tool was put in place, etc. But yet we hung on to a manual process that cost. I mean, I've seen in the case where there was processes being inflicted on us that were take a month for two people to do the process at cost of $30,000, $40,000, and you actually can see no actual value for it. So really breaking down and seeing, does this process need to happen? And then does it happen in the most efficient way? And how do we work together as a team?
Yeah. Travis, so we've identified some of the problems here, and our goal, which is really to field capabilities faster, but we still have to meet compliance and accreditation requirements. How do you balance the need to deliver, capabilities quickly with the fact that, there is this process that we have to go through?
Yeah, and I think you've got to balance sort of two conflicting goals. One is we are repeatedly getting owned in cyberspace across the government in a variety of ways. So nobody wants to lower the bar. And so anything that feels like it's lowering the bar is probably going to be persona non grata with the authorizing officials of the world. At the same time, every DevSecOps shop is frustrated with how long it takes to get through manual paper-based processes in a cloud-native DevOps world, which is what the industry's moved towards today. So I think it's just realigning on mindsets. And so a lot of these tools are what I'll call Gen 1 GRC tools, where you type it into a web portal instead of Word or Excel, but it's still very manual, very reactive, still very paper-driven under the hood. What we've got to get to is more of a GRC engineering mindset, where things are more compliance as code. They integrate with software factories and DevSecOps programs. They then rely on automation and the ability to pull back actual line speed data and make sure the paperwork's actually up to date. If we can do that, you get sort of the dual win of, one, it moves faster, so that makes everybody happy. And two, it costs a lot less because you don't have to send humans out on rounds to sample things and create tons of paperwork nobody wants to read and nobody wants to write. You just let automation automatically update your paperwork. And so the exciting part for me is I've served in my federal career where there was no hope. Automation wasn't at a point where this was possible. The tooling wasn't in place. Today, technology's advanced so far that there are better approaches to unlock dramatic efficiency shifts. It just requires changing mindsets and the way you think through the problem with the GRC engineering mindset versus a manual audit mindset from the 1990s, which is what a lot of these programs are built on.
Hey, and Travis, speaking of mindset, I think one of the things that I've been able to start thinking about and articulating, the imbalance that has come within the DoD, and I think federal in general, is the idea that compliance is king. We must be compliant, and that will somehow contribute to the mission outcomes and security outcomes we're seeking. And in fact, what's happening is we're sacrificing security and the mission on the altar of compliance every day. All the checklist stuff and all the things that we're doing, it's verifiably, and I experienced this in our case and what we did with our digital transformation with Operation StormBreaker specifically. When you do those manual processes, they're verifiably less secure, they're more point in time based, and it's a document centric approach that's invalid the day that you get your paper signed. If if your measure of success is uploading scans every 30 days for 3 years, you're not actively monitoring threats and doing continuous monitoring. And then when you start to tack on the timelines that you guys are all experiencing, that I've experienced, of 12 to 18 months or much longer, you're not meeting mission need and mission capability. And we're in a new world in the last 5 years, and it's accelerating faster as we speak, that the orders of magnitude in which faster that we need to operate and deploy capability to outpace our adversaries, it requires that we harmonize between security outcomes and mission, and let the result of those two things being done well reflect in our compliance. And so our compliance, as you mentioned, should be focused on demonstrating that those mission outcomes and security are done well, and here's how you can audit or verify that.
Yeah, the way I like to think about that is sort of classic Pareto. I think the government spends 80% of its time creating paper to prove it's doing security versus actually doing security. And that's upside down. It needs to be the other way, where they're more self-documenting. You spend 20% of the time doing the QA process and 80% of the time driving security and risk outcomes. And so I think that's the transition everybody wants to see at the end of the day. And it has the benefit of actually creating more secure environments, right? So the trade-off for everybody should be positive.
Yeah, definitely. So we've mentioned paperwork. We know we have like administrative controls that we have to meet. There's documentation that has to be written, but there's technical requirements as well. So Kendall, could you talk about what the biggest problem that you've seen when organizations are attempting to implement and maintain technical controls and then into continuous monitoring and over time, and kind of how that feeds into something like a GRC system where we're able to demonstrate that compliance moving forward?
Yeah, definitely. Let me first frame my answer as a little bit of like a POV story, right? So when I first got into the IC, I was put on an engineering team, and our job was to automate hardening systems specifically to get through ATO. And the very first time that I went through this experience went like this, right? I'm 23 years old. I think I'm a pretty good programmer. I have no idea what hardening a system is, right? I was not a systems engineer. So I get tasked with, hey, we need to harden this so that we can get this system through our internal ATO so that we can use it and do development. Like, okay, great. What do I do? Go log on to it and NFS mount this thing over here and run these Perl scripts out of this dude's home directory who doesn't work here anymore, and then run this script to trigger a scan. And when that's done, upload this thing and send it as an email attachment to the security team. Like, okay, that seems ridiculous, but all right, I'll do that, right? So I do, and it sort of works. Not exactly, but it sort of works. And I upload the scan, and I do nothing for 2 weeks, right? Because literally we could do nothing until we had the internal ATO to operate on this thing. 2 weeks go by, and we get an email from a security team, and it just says, fix this. And it has a spreadsheet attached to it. And I was like, first off, why is this a spreadsheet? Second off, what do you want me to do, right? So I think that story is the summary of the problem for the engineers trying to do this, which is that policy is written by people, often from a non-technical background with some amount of input from technical people, oftentimes lawyers, oftentimes other very smart people, highly advanced cybersecurity people, but typically not systems engineers. So we get all these policies and all these control families, like from NIST 853, kind of the overarching standard we're all looking to meet. And someone says, okay, go harden a system so that it's compliant to that. And it's like, okay, I mean, I can try, right? So that's part of the problem is engineers not necessarily speaking the language of cybersecurity. And I would say the other part of the problem is really inaccuracy of the cybersecurity tooling that we interface with. So let's say we want to scan with a benchmark from DISA, like a standard DISA stig that almost anyone scans with. It's rife with false positives, with false negatives. There's also a bunch of highly specific documentation on these things that we have to write. There was just absolutely no process. So basically, we got bogged down by not knowing exactly what we wanted to automate, not fully understanding what the requirements were, not really knowing exactly the format that they needed to. So we had this a couple of tools we had to interface with, eMaster, Exacta, right? We had really no idea how to do that. We didn't have direct access to them. They had to go through a security team and a documentation team just to be packaged together. So all that is to say, all I did was fire off pull scripts and wait 2 weeks to be told I had to go do my job again without being told what it was I had to do. So I think being able to actually automate or translate these security controls into something that can be done via configuration management, done via automation, was really the key problem that we tried to solve. Was how do we actually prove these things internally? How do we know that we're hardening before we even start trying to go through this ATO process?
Hey, Lisa, that inspires me a little bit too, to tell a little bit about the experience. So we've heard all of this shift left discussion around, okay, we're going to shift cyber left, and what does that mean? And I know we all mean, generically speaking, that means let's do security by design. But what does that look like in implementation? And I had a front row seat to see that happen a couple of months ago, and it was a fascinating thing. So we built a CI/CD pipeline in our cloud native environment, and that's where we have our RAISE platform of choice capability. Allows us to deploy containerized workloads same day with an authorization, which is really helpful. We went from months and months to minutes. We had a managed service provider, Raven Solutions, who supports our environment. Primarily our initial products that we deployed through our pipeline, we used their engineers, and so they were comfortable and familiar with all the tooling and doing all the things. Well, we onboarded the local government engineer team onto the platform, and they had never had a system authorized that they had built code for. They primarily focus on system integrations and APIs and things like that. And they had never gone through that process. They were doing what Kendall was describing for his 23-year-old self. That was their life. And it was fascinating to watch them, the learning curve that happened with people that were using tools that were, 15 or 20 years old and didn't really have exposure to the DevOps, being in a platform that had the capability. And then they would build code and they would leave a secret in there and they'd push it through and it would pop back and say, we need to fix this. And the platform team's like, hey, you should not put secrets in your code. And to see that learning happen in 15 minutes. So within a matter of weeks, you saw people who didn't even know what the requirements were to design and develop from a security perspective, learn through those lessons very, very rapidly. Oh, we should use AWS Secrets Manager. Okay, now how do we set that up? Okay, and you can see all this happening. I'm watching this in Slack, right, as this develops. So it's a really cool journey to see that happen, and that has become very visceral to me of, what do you mean by shifting left? I mean, people who are doing the work understand the security implications and are able to modify and change their ways of working that enable those faster cycle times. So now we are not going 18 months, 2 years later to find out the guy put secrets in his code. We found out in 15 minutes.
Oh, hold on one second. The poll just popped up on me. Okay, actually, it was perfect timing because next I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things that you may have seen in the news lately. So the DoD CIO's office recently made comments and really asked for feedback from industry and experience about kind of what are the obstacles, how can we solve the continuous ATO problem, and how efficient, I guess, is the RMF, and is that the right framework for us to use? And so, Travis, do you want to take it for a minute and discuss a little on your thoughts on Katie Arrington's kind of initiative with this kind of new push and feedback?
Well, I applaud anyone who's got a goal of trying to make this go faster and sort of reduce the cost to the government. At the same time, I sort of stand by my comment, you don't want to lower the bar because cyberspace is more dangerous than it's ever been as the world gets more dangerous. And so I think it's trying to find a way to blend those things. And so listening to Kendall talk, like, the win should be, as a developer, as a system owner, I don't have to care about RMF. I don't have to really understand it. I should just be able to push my code, my system through a software factory to a hardened environment, and I just want to see the lights go green in my pipeline, right? And if they don't go green, tell me exactly why they're not green so that I can go fix it. I think that's the state of the art that everybody's pushing to. Dave in the Marine Corps has been just a champion for this across government. We see similar things in other places in DoD and in Fed Civ that we operate. But I think what you want to get out of is these bespoke snowflake environments that are configured by hand, that are super brittle, that are almost impossible to secure, and get to more hardened infrastructure running hardened code in an end-to-end instrumented modern environment. That's how you're going to get to the other side of zero trust and where everybody wants to end up. So I think you can get there without sort of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Because when you read the RMF and to NIST's defense, like every control in 853 is a best practice from somewhere, right? They're just all situational, right? Like some of those made sense when you were in client server, they make less sense in zero trust. But if you look at it as a collection of best practices and you pick the ones that are most appropriate to your environment, implement them well, then I think you end up in a better place that's lower cost, that's lower risk, and doesn't undo 30 years of some of the best security research in the world at NIST. So I think there's a way to make it all work nicely together.
Yeah, great. Looking forward to that happening. So we've mentioned a little bit, and also it kind of does tie into Katie Arrington's latest initiative, but everyone is resource constrained right now. We've obviously seen some reduction in force happening as well. So it makes it, even more necessary for the right tools, but also really the right processes in place, and the right automation. So, Kendall, could you talk a little bit about what that looks like in the balance between solving a problem with tools, and also solving the problem with the correct process and automation?
Yeah, well, short answer is that you need both, right? So I'm with Travis in that anyone who wants to create efficiency, I'm all for it, right? I think if I had the opportunity to suggest one and only one thing to Katie Arrington that I would say we learn from our mistakes and we can do something better than the RMF, it's really genuinely have a seat at the table for engineers. There are really smart architects in the government at just about every agency that I've been a part of. But let's take someone like CISA, for example, right? I think secure by design is great. I actually prefer secure by design as opposed to shift left, even though they're arguably trying to get at the same thing. When you say shift left to a real systems engineer, you're like, well, dude, I want to shift everything left. The more I can put and build, the less I have to manage out here when it's deployed, the better, right? Whereas when you're actually saying secure by design, it's sort of really hammering home that like it's not just shifting everything left. Like you really have to build like a secure design, secure architecture. You want to fit into that. As far as tooling and automation versus process, there are tools that can enable automation and there are tools that can enable process. And the goal, I think, is trying to make these things work efficiently together. Oh, we do this every day in the commercial world because there are just less hoops to go through. If I want to build an integration to another commercial product, I write them an email, I get on a phone call, and within a week we're up and moving and trying to build something, you know. But in government, there's a lot more red tape. So when you end up getting these like fiefdoms of I'm not going to pick on any particular product, but like products that just live there for like 20, 30 years and they've way overstayed their welcome. They have no APIs, certainly no public ones. You can't integrate with these things. So you need good tooling and you need a process that evaluates these things, right? You need a process that evaluates, is this effective? Is it efficient? Is it actually accomplishing security? And again, I think if you have engineers at the table, they're going to know better than anyone else. Hey, we can automate this really easily. Hey, we can't automate this because of X, Y, and Z. It might be because these systems can't talk to each other for a bunch of reasons, but they're going to know that stuff because they live and breathe that pain all the time. They have project managers and security architects all the time, like, hey, this is a problem, go fix this. And it's like, well, I can't fix this. I would love to, but like I can't do it. So again, I think have all of the relevant stakeholders at the table. It might take a little longer than just having a policymaker write a policy, but you're going to know exactly where your burdens are, and you're going to know, hey, if I know this is going to be a big problem, let's go out to industry, let's go to some commercial vendors, present this exact problem, say this is the design, we need to solve this. We don't think we have the expertise right now, and I think you'll find that that system works a whole bunch better.
Yeah, speaking of bringing engineers into the process, we've seen over the last decade or so, security languages, right, to be used in engineering environments that are able to then theoretically make it much easier for, all the tools to kind of talk to each other. So I know we had SCAP for a long time. The new transition is to OSCAL, OSCAL. Travis, I know RegScale is a big fan of OSCAL and pushing that forward. Could you talk a little bit about kind of what OSCAL is and kind of some of the benefits from it and where you see it going with all of these initiatives that we've talked about?
Sure thing. I think we're a big fan of really sort of compliance as code in general, with OSCAL being a major sort of government push. I see OSCAL as part of an integrated process that I'll describe real quick. And so there's three standards that work together in our head that should help you automate every aspect of the ATO RMF. The first is OSCAL for publishing, getting out of providing control PDFs of documents or control spreadsheets, getting to machine readable, precise controls that engineering teams can go implement. That's sort of step one with OSCAL. The next step is sort of the shift left in the CI/CD pipeline. There's where things like software bill of materials or SBOM come in, machine readable ingredients, so you know what's in your software. Really helps with some of the supply chain exploits and other things that are getting much more active in the wild. Third is once you're running in production, you want to know, am I in the state that I think I'm in? That's where things like OCSF, the Open Cybersecurity Schema Framework, Security Data Interoperability Standard. Now I can see configuration checks, asset information, vuln data in common formats and surface that up. And then at the end, you publish it all out in an OSCAL format. And I think of that like a compiler. When I write code, I know if it's good or bad by whether it will compile, or at least the first indicator of whether it's good or bad is, did it compile? Well, it didn't compile, there were errors. So I'm outside my risk boundary. So I think of OSCAL as an RMF compiler. So now that I have all this data aggregated as code, when I run it through my compiler, am I in my boundary or not? And if I am, so I'm an old nuclear guy, so I think nuclear safety basis. We used to think if you're inside the nuclear safety basis that's approved, you can just go. Like, you don't need any more mother may ask from the government. The government's already approved the envelope. What I'd really like to see is the government approve OSCAL risk thresholds. You compile into it and teams can just go. As long as your lights are green when you're going through and you compile at the end, there's no need for a Fed to take a look and spend weeks or months signing off. You're in the boundary. Or this other thing's super risky. Maybe the mission really needs it. Now we want a risk official to make a call. But I think we waste a lot of valuable risk official calls on mundane transactional stuff. And I think OSCAL can be a great unlock. I also like that all three of those things are open standards and not tool specific. So you get no vendor lock-in. It gives you flexibility. And so for all the people on the webinar, I'd encourage them to think about open standards, as well as things like CS benchmarks that you can use that don't lock you into one specific provider and give you flexibility going forward.
Awesome. Yeah, we talked a lot about kind of the technical aspect of things here. Dave, could you talk a little bit? I know in my experience, there was the problem of not having the automation in place, not having the tools available. But there's also a culture aspect, I think, particularly that we ran into when trying to get through the ATO process. Could you touch specifically on, your experience, your team's experience, on kind of solving, I guess, the culture problem?
Actually, I'm excited about answering that question. For some reason, I have a little bit of passion related to that. And maybe it's because I don't know anything about ones and zeros really. So Travis and Kendall are talking over my head. So that I think is a large majority. And as I've evolved to how I think about describing this problem and kind of how we addressed it, to be really simplistic in one of my answers, which is culture really is how are you working together? And that's what I've kind of seen. And then so when we look at how the engineers are working together, how are the engineers and the security teams working together, how are the project managers and the mission owners and the technical folks supporting the application. And so I've spent a fair amount of time working on helping solving those gaps and educating, and then even developing training materials and documents. I'll just give you a little example. We were continuing to have friction between the project managers and the product owners and the functional people and our platform team for various reasons. And so we developed called a SecOps strategic principles or strategic guidance. I don't know, whatever it was. And it put this document together and it became a living document for us. And I updated it just recently within the last couple of weeks. As we run into a situation and we are not working well together, we come up with a solution for what that looks like. And then we applied some principles to it, aligned everybody, and iteratively do that. So instead of waiting till the end of a project, right, and putting together a retrospective 2 years later that nobody's going to read that goes in some project closeout file, we literally like take those lessons in real time, adjust our guidance, and share that back out with the teams. And that's just a small example of some of that, but this really is moving from, and in our organization, the leadership is starting to get behind this. We're moving our organization, and I know there's some areas in the government because I'm on a few different working groups and I've been exposed to this. It's super encouraging to see more of this product team-based approach versus project team. And so personally, I'm pretty passionate about that shift. So we're making those shifts here. And where we had a product to work on and we had built and organized a product team, we've had dramatic success. And I think most people on the webinar here are tracking this, but I think it's worth saying out loud. Having a mindset where everybody's working towards the same mission outcome and they have autonomy within that domain, and the topology of that team framework allows people to work together in a way that they're working towards the same thing. When you think of the budget-based, like project-based, and then stovepipe matrix organizations, as most government organizations are, you really get that. I'm done with my part. I'll throw it over the cube wall. And this is where all those delays and queues come in. So I'm kind of counterbalancing a little bit of where Travis and Kendall have talked a ton about the criticality and importance of automation and not doing manual tasks. But even in a manual task world, if you've got queues and delays and handoffs and stagnation with the team and no interoperability between the teams, you can gain a ton of efficiencies, which was what we did. I mean, when we compressed doing authorizations, step 3 to 5 in RMF, inside 30 days routinely from 12 to 18 months, which is what we did. And we did that largely without automation. There was some tooling. We used Jira to help us with, managing workflow, and we do lean. Travis, you mentioned quite a bit of like, what's the ideal scenario for on a kind of the future state of DevOps and baking your security and risk tolerances into your environment and the infrastructure as code. So we did do those things, and those are dramatically helpful. Leveraging some of the tooling like what RegScale provides helps us with some of that automation piece, but still a large part, you can't walk away from the culture aspect and understanding that teams have to figure out how to work together, right? So when I gave that little vignette of, the platform team was supporting a new group coming into the pipeline, that's a culture thing. How do they work together? Using chat ops in Slack, reacting differently than your traditional, I'm going to send you an email. Kendall, said, hey, they sent me an email and said, fix this stuff and let us know. No help, no working together, that type of thing. So that's the culture shift that I think, and that is going to take some time to shift. And when you asked Kendall the question about, or Kendall, when you said, what is the one thing that I would say to Katie Arrington? And I struggle a little bit because I was in the speech that she gave at TechNet Cyber. I was there in the room, and it was pretty powerful to be experiencing that and thinking about that. And she's used the term multiple times, blow up RMF. If you unpack that and listen more in context, she's saying the same things that we're saying, which is this is an unacceptable pace of delivering capability. And we are not just going to tinker around with some, RMF 2.0 to fix this. We got to get at some major things. And you heard her talk a lot about this, and it's in alignment with what we've all been talking here. You got to leverage automation and AI to the degree that you can to remediate those processes while accelerating the outcomes and being more secure while you do it. And I think you can have all of that together. And you guys also discussed earlier about the cost, like, oh my gosh, in a budget constrained environment. And I'm going to challenge that on its face. I'm actually talking about doing security better, saving time, and doing it way less with way less cost. And I haven't talked about procuring a bunch of systems or going through some long acquisition cycle to do this. These are things that people could implement today in their organizations that could start driving cost and delay. So I think the compelling answer is with the burning platform around what we need to deliver from a capability, and also the drive towards efficiency within the government, which I'm 100% aligned with. It doesn't need to be this way. It should be containerized workloads going into authorization same day, like Travis described. It's critical that we start to shift that mindset. So I don't think there's an easy answer here, but I mean, even being here on this forum with you guys talking about these things, this is what we're talking about. We need to actually start as a community saying enough is enough. We're not going to do this anymore. There are ways to do it. Other people are doing it. Let's link arms and start actually driving the change.
Yeah, Dave, I'd love to follow up here because you said, I mean, I agree with everything you say. And, just for the people on the webinar that don't know me, I am team engineer through and through. I am a lifelong engineer. I will always work with engineers, right? It's what I love doing. It's where I'm comfortable. And I will sit here and tell you that culture change is the most important part of solving this problem. It is more important than anything you could ever possibly do with engineering. And I'll share an example with that. We had a system that we were working on, and we had to interface with a tool called QRadar. And for those that don't know, it's effectively, let's call it a log processing tool by IBM. So we had to ship a bunch of logs over to QRadar, and QRadar, I think IBM has since fixed this, but it didn't support encrypted TLS. So it didn't support TLS, so you could not send encrypted logs to this thing. And I mentioned this since it's too bad, it's a requirement to it. So I do it, and it gets popped by security like, hey, dude, you can't send unencrypted logs to this thing. So it's like, well, I don't have a choice, right? Like I have to do it. I was told I have to do it, so I did it. They're like, well, go fix it, go encrypt it. I'm like, I can't. I don't own the QRadar system. It doesn't even roll up to the same division chief. It might as well be in a different country, right? Like I have absolutely no access to this thing. And I got berated by like the security person, like bringing me to the PM to like, he's not doing his job. It's like, well, yeah, I'm not doing my job. I would love for you to enable me to do my job, right? And that is really the crux of the culture problem is like we have to trust each other a little bit more. Like I'm not telling you no because I think this is fun, right? Like I don't like getting yelled at by project managers. It's not what I set out to do. I would love to continue again automating meaningful problems instead of bureaucratic ones. So Dave is so right. Like fix the culture, trust the smart people. If you don't have smart people, go get smart people. They're around. They want to do this work, right? Get smart people and trust that they're going to try and do this. And when they come to you with a problem, whoever you are, listen to them, right? There's probably a good reason for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my experience, getting the right tools in place, it will only get you so far. We have a lot of great technology now that we can use to start to solve the problem. But I think, one of the biggest things that we can do is really build relationships. I feel like my ATO started going much faster when I had relationships throughout the entire process. I was the security engineer in the middle, and so I'm dealing with the engineers, but I'm also dealing with, the DAOs and the AOs and everything else. And so, building relationships on both sides, listening to the engineers, as they explain to me why they can't do something, and actually listening to them, and do we have mitigations in place? Is this really as big of a deal as we think it is? How do I explain this to the DAO? That's all culture and relationship building, and that's going to have as big of an impact on getting through ATO as having the right tools. So I know we have to wrap up a little bit in a few minutes so that we can get a few questions in. So I'm just gonna really quickly go around to everybody, and instead of asking an AI question or something like that, I'm just gonna ask you, in an ideal world, right? How like what would in your mind the ideal world to get through ATO? Like what is that? I know it's in a sentence or two. Um, in an ideal world, how would this work getting through ATO? What would you like people to think about when they're leaving? That's kind of the most important thing here. Let's start, Travis.
Sure. So I'm going to quote sort of Peter Thiel. He would always say, if something, they give you an answer of something that should take a year, and he always would say, like, why can't we do it in a month? Like looking for some 10x improvement. I would start, like, if you can't find a way to get 10x better than your current ATO process, unless you're Dave and you've already modernized, like, you're probably not trying very hard. Like, so I'd be constantly pushing yourself of what are the cultural, technology, people, process things we can do to get a 10x order of magnitude return to the taxpayer, because it is technically achievable. There's a lot of great tool vendors out there that do this. But I'd look for a 10x return, and I'd push people to the extent you can follow compliance as code standards, and build on sort of a stable foundation for the future.
All right, Kendall.
Yeah, I would say don't let a policy just be words. Let a policy be a framework for how you want to accomplish ATO. So let a policy describe why a system needs to be secure and perhaps how. Let a policy be OSCAL based. Let a policy be integratable with tools like RegScale. And let a policy map the security controls into automation, into configuration, into technology, right? Because then a policy can be automated in phases. Different pieces of a policy can be automated. It can be automated by different experts. Not everyone is going to be an expert in every stage of this process. And oh my God, if you are, I don't even know, you've had a rough life, right? Like there's just so much that goes into it. So again, don't think of a policy as a piece of language written by a lawyer or a policy expert. Think of it as a process or a framework where you can automate individual components with really smart people.
Dave, final thoughts?
Yeah, so this is a little challenge for me to think about how to respond to this. I think I'm going to respond in two ways. One, if you haven't decided and put yourself on a path to modernizing your capability and moving forward with cloud native capability, then you need to find a pathway to do that and get rolling on that. Largely the DoD, and I suspect this is the case across the government, I don't know that for sure, we are not using modern container development in the way that we should. And everybody needs to be in a software factory / CI/CD pipeline. That's the answer. And Travis, you started to unpack that earlier, but I'll double down on that. Getting yourself in a pipeline map where you can put your risk tolerances into the platform and the underlying capability, so your engineers can focus on creating mission enabling capability. So I'm a huge advocate of that process, and that has been hugely beneficial to us. I have been advocating with some of the leadership on the Navy side for the RAISE program to be talking about applying that same methodology to virtual machines. So if we can start to close the gap where we think about RMF as a purely automated underlying capability, which is, by the way, what we do with Operation StormBreaker. We provide cybersecurity to the mission owner as a service on purpose. We don't tell them, you go figure out cybersecurity, here's where you are in step on RMF, et cetera. We don't do that, and that's on purpose. We provide this as service. You just worry about your mission workload. Oh, by the way, we're going to need you to patch your application. Hey, this STIG broke your thing. You need to fix this. Do it from that perspective. So I think automating RMF, and there's a lot of ways to do it. one of the ways we're doing it is through the CI/CD pipelines. I think we can move outside of just containers, but virtual machines as well, and get yourself into a proper landing zone where you're hosting in a modern infrastructure capability, and you can move orders of magnitude faster. That gets the 10x. In my case here, Travis, I'm calculating 17x. The other thing is, don't allow yourself to be trapped. And I've had a lot of conversations here. People are getting trapped in the idea of, oh, well, we can't afford to do it. You can't afford not to do it. If it takes you $1 million to get an authorization for every workload, build a CI/CD pipeline and manage 15, 20, 30 products through there, that's a $30 million savings every 3 years. Plus you're delivering capability faster. And I see a kind of a fixed mindset a lot of times with colleagues across the DoD where they're like, oh, well, we have budget. Yeah, you can't afford not to do this. Mission outcomes and cost. So anyways, sorry to be too preachy there.
Oh, awesome. Appreciate it. I think we're gonna, Rocco, we take questions now.
Yep. So thank you all for speaking with us today. And now it is time for our Q&A session. If you have a question, please use the Q&A pod at the bottom of your screen and we'll get to it. It looks like we have a couple from earlier in the webinar. Lisa, do you want to distribute those to who's best fit to answer?
Yeah, Jose asks that his experiences with the delay of ATOs is more to do, and we touched on this a little bit, but I'll ask for a little bit more feedback. Is more to do with the admins not hardening DISA-STIGs and not remediating vulnerabilities on time. So rather than, I guess, it being the process, it's coming back to, things aren't hardened and looking as they're supposed to look when they go through ATO. So does anybody want to touch on that a little?
I can't tell if Jose is referring to me or someone else, right? But I think I'll happily take this one. Yeah, Jose, been there. There's a bunch of reasons why this happens. It could be just genuine lack of understanding. It could be there could be a technical block, like I mentioned with QRadar and not having encryption, right? There could be a bunch of these things. It could be related to patch cycles. It could just be fear of breaking production, right? So there's an element of DISA-STIGs that are just going to scan an operating system or scan some piece of middleware, like Oracle Web Server or something, right? And if you make that change, you therefore have to own any of the fallout. And if you don't have that trust, or as Dave had mentioned, if you don't have that culture to embrace security, to embrace change, to embrace automation and iteration. So even if there is an issue, right, like you can address it quickly. If you don't have that stuff, it can really be a difficult challenge to make one of those changes. Happy to chat offline, if you want to get into some more detail on this, but yeah, there's stuff out there. There are solutions. There are ways to automate STIGs. There are ways to customize and scan and automate STIGs. So hit me up. Happy to chat.
All right, thanks, Kendall. Another question, in hybrid environments, what's the best way to automate compliance if I have stuff both in the cloud, on-prem, and in containers? How am I automating compliance to get ATO when I have such a wide variety of environments?
For fear of people getting sick of my voice, I'll take a shot at this one, and I'll be quick. I sort of already answered the question. Think of a policy as a framework. Don't think of a policy as words. If you treat a policy as the framework that you need to meet in order to get through ATO, so that includes hardening, it includes scanning, it includes continuous monitoring, it includes documentation, evidence collection, and it includes integration with GRC tools, right? So if a policy is every one of those, you can identify really smart people and great vendors and great tools to automate and solve those individual components. It's like, you can't boil the ocean, but you can boil your pot of water, right? So turn it into multiple pots of water and boil it that way.
Yeah, just to add to it, I'd say if you're running in a single cloud, it's easy to use cloud native services, but when you get outside their boundary, they tend to struggle to support the on-prem and other cloud stuff. But there are tools out there. Sicura is obviously one of them. They're cloud agnostic and can harden environments anywhere. And things like Ansible playbooks that you can build and run and push to any environment. But I'd be taking very much a configuration as code approach and figuring out how to push that wherever it needs to go.
And I'll come in from the other side of things to say I have a hard time putting an actual number on it, but the amount of lost time in the authorization process just related to how people work together is incredible. I don't know what the percentage is. It could be, I believe it's well north of 50%. So all the things that talked about in automation, and so we experience these same things. We have hybrid workloads. We have an on-prem network and a cloud environment, and we're able to get a lot of the efficiencies we're talking about, even orders of magnitude efficiencies, by just addressing policies and practices that are not applicable, and figuring out how we streamline and work together more efficiently. And then when you layer that infrastructure as code and the other automation that was mentioned on top of that, that's when you really start to accelerate those timelines. But there's ways. So I guess maybe my main point here is you don't have to wait for some other thing to happen before you can get engaged and start making a difference.
The last thought maybe I'll give you on this one, because it's sort of on the other side for the AOs, a zero tolerance mindset is bad. A lot of these things happen where we have there's a crit older than 10 days, you can't pass sort of mindset. It ignores the fact there were 30 crits in production and only one of them couldn't be patched. So I think to some degree, good security is better security, and better security is measuring what you did yesterday, comparing it to where you're at today, and are you moving in the right direction, versus sort of the zero tolerance mentality, which doesn't really work and just slows all the gears down in the process.
And I'd answer one other question that just came in around recommendations on CI/CD pipeline. I'm a huge proponent of the Navy's RAISE, Rapid Assess Incorporate Software Engineering process and certification. They apply 8 security gates to RMF, and you're able to build your RMF requirements through automation in minutes, which is what we've been able to do, why we can deploy workloads that quickly.
All right, I think we're out of time, guys. Turn it back over to Carousel.
Yes, unfortunately, are out of time. But as always, a big thank you to our speakers for being with us this afternoon. I'd also like to thank all of our participants who joined us today. We hope this webinar has been helpful for you and your organization. Thanks again, and have a great day, everyone.